The Dice of Chaos, written and narrated by Glenn Dahlgren. Lorre couldn't ever remember rain as hard as this. Torrents of water pummeled her shoulders and soaked her worn travel cloak through, its weight making every step a chore. This was no night for a stroll, especially over such rough and dangerous terrain. And yet, she had little choice. For years, she'd happily kept her house, fixed meals from the fish her husband caught, and read bedtime stories to her young twins. But all the while, a voice whispered in her head.
"Fight you may, but deep down you know,"
the voice repeated.
"It's time to leave. You have to go."
It had to be a god's voice. Only gods were responsible for the longing, the inexorable pull she felt. Lorre didn't know which god would deign to speak to her, and in rhyme for some reason, but it was insistent. The more she resisted, the stronger the longing became, until one day it almost literally pulled her out of the house and onto a path she'd never taken. The longing dragged her through crowded forests, over rocky ravines, and now up a muddy hillside, which gripped Lorre's feet with its muck. As she sighed and pulled at her foot, Lorre noticed a wave of water and mud racing down the hill toward her. In desperation, she freed her feet, but there was no escaping the mudslide. The runoff pushed her down and threatened to cover her, but instead tumbled Lorre into a nearby, fast-rushing stream. Panicking, Lorre grasped at nearby rocks, but the swift, freezing water tore her numb grip away. Her head dunked below the surface as the current slammed her against the many submerged stones, and then tossed her over the lip of a waterfall. She could only stare at the approaching surface of the cliff's bottom, certain it would be the last thing she saw. Lorre awoke, gagging and coughing, her torso splayed across a cold, wet mound that both smelled and felt like a rotting corpse. She lifted her head, her cheek covered in the thick, rancid slime of decayed vegetation. She knew she was lucky that she ended up perched on something above the dark water's surface. Otherwise, she would probably have drowned.
"The air may smell like death," she thought, "but at least I'm breathing it."
Dawn's weak sun revealed that she wasn't in a stream anymore. Stagnant water stretched in every direction and covered the roots of looming but shriveled trees, choked by thick vines. Soaked, tired, and colder than she'd ever been, Lorre lay in this unfamiliar swamp, but something about that gave her a tiny glimmer of hope. The longing let her lie in this water. She could still sense the direction it wanted to take her, but she had the power to resist it. Exhausted, but excited about this newfound freedom, Lorre pushed herself to her feet, wiped the scum from her face, and tried to wring out her long, dark locks. Shivering, she clutched the soaked travel cloak around her and began to wade through the calf-deep water toward something. It called to her. Whatever it was, that something held the longing's pull at bay. It didn't demand her presence, though, only invited it, which began to replace her anxiety with curiosity. Lorre didn't much like or trust the gods of order, which is why she was so surprised to discover she had the longing. She was in no hurry to see which god was dragging her over such terrible terrain, indeed, almost killing her. So this respite allowed her to reassess everything. If something here countered the longing, maybe she could use it to spurn the god's call, and maybe even return to her family.
Could I actually do that? She wondered. Reject a god? Turn down a destiny that others would kill for?
Teeth chattering at the cold, she pushed aside a curtain of hanging foliage to discover a tree beyond. But it wasn't anything like the others she'd passed. This twisting, towering tree dominated the swamp and put all of its withered neighbors to shame. Thick wooden cords wove themselves into a massive trunk nearly the size of a building, and then extended outward into more twisted, bulbous branches than she could count. Each branch jutted one random direction and then another, or split into even more, as if the tree couldn't make up its mind as to where to end them. Strange, glistening fruit hung from those branches, interspersed among thick moss and stringy leaves. In the corner of her eye, Lorre swore she saw images flare up where the sun kissed those branches. Simple pictures, icons perhaps. but when she looked directly at them, they fled. Nervous and fascinated, she approached the tree, but stopped when she noticed thorns, some perhaps a foot in length, poking from the trunk.
Both inviting and threatening. I kind of like this tree.
She shivered again. Her dripping cloak felt like it was actually making her colder. And as much as this tree intrigued her, nothing about it was going to warm her. But, as if summoned by her concern, a familiar smell thankfully nudged away the swamp's pervasive rotten odor, a whiff of burning wood. She whipped her head around and spotted a column of smoke in the sky, not from an uncontrolled flame, but the kind of smoke that brought a chimney to mind.
Someone has a house out here? In this swamp?
The promise of heat was enough to force Lorre's feet into motion. She sloshed through the water toward that smoke, bullying her way through muck and vines and sickly trees, until she saw it. A sturdy wooden house propped perhaps 10 feet above the water on stilts. Welcoming light spilled from its open windows, and the smoke she'd been following indeed rose from a stone chimney. But, suspended as the house was, there was no way to get to that fire. Throwing caution aside, she called,
"Hello? Is anyone in there?"
Caution was overrated anyway. It wouldn't keep her from freezing to death. A few minutes passed. Lorre was about to shout again when a balding, wrinkled head popped out of the window. The old man squinted and frowned. Even from this distance, Lorre couldn't miss those impressive white eyebrows that were both wispy and bushy, which matched a flowing beard.
"Who's out there?" he yelled. "Show yourself!"
Could he not see her? It's not like Lorre was hiding.
"I'm down here. Can I come in and get warm, please? I'm freezing."
She waved to get his attention. The man's eyes squinted harder, but he quickly added a smile.
"Oh, of course, young lady. We'll be right with you."
The head disappeared from the window. Some muffled conversation preceded the grinding sound of a crank in much need of oil. A section of the floor popped open, and one side began to gradually tilt downward. Lorre stared intently as a contraption built of boards, springs, and ropes unfolded in front of her. When it had lowered completely, a full staircase reached from the water to the house above. The old man's voice floated from above.
"Go help her. She might be injured."
In response, a teen emerged from the hole in the floor and began to climb down the stairs, grumbling under his breath. Even though he stood much taller, the boy looked like a younger version of the other. Long, wispy eyebrows, a pointed chin and nose, and a permanent squint. He stalked down the stairs as if it were the last thing in the world he wanted to do.
"I was already going. You don't need to."
"Did you bring a blanket for her?"
The old man stuck his head out the window again and craned his neck.
"She's freezing. Didn't you just hear her say that?"
"A blanket?"
The lad stopped, rolled his eyes toward the sky, and lifted his palms.
"Why didn't you say anything before?" "No, it's fine."
Lorre sloshed to the staircase.
"Please don't make me wait for a blanket. I just need to get next to your fire."
The boy held out his hand.
"I'll help you anyway. You look exhausted. Please come in."
Lorre smiled and placed her palm in his.
"Thank you. My name is Lorre." "I'm Crick. And the old man up there is—"
"Jared,"
interrupted the man now standing at the top of the stairs.
"I'll have your forgotten blanket waiting by the fire for you, and some hot tea if you like."
With Crick's help, Lorre climbed the stairs and stepped inside a cozy cabin. The walls were covered with shelves, home to lamps, books, and not a few wood carvings. But her attention was drawn to the crackling fire in a mortared stone fireplace. She dove to it, thrust her hands forward, and drank in the warmth.
"Crick, get this poor woman a robe. Her clothes are soaked."
The gnomish old man bobbed his head and smiled.
"We'll give you some privacy to get dressed. Your blanket and tea are by the hearth."
The two ducked into another room. Almost immediately, Crick emerged with a woman's robe.
"Here." "Oh, is there someone else here? A woman?"
asked Lorre, holding up the robe.
"No,"
responded Crick, heading back into the room.
"Just me and the old man."
As soon as Crick left, Lorre didn't hesitate. She stripped her dripping clothes off and laid them on the windowsill. She enveloped herself first in the robe and then the thick blanket. Finally, she plopped down in front of the fire and sipped steaming mint tea from a ceramic mug. Given the way this day started, this felt too good to be true. But even if this was all a dream brought on by hitting her head in that stream, she didn't want to wake up.
Lorre?
Someone nudged her shoulder.
Wake up.
Lorre blinked her eyes open. Crick stood over her with an anxious expression.
Crick, it's really you? This house is real?
The boy shrugged.
Of course it's real, but I think you're too close to the fire. And besides, it's time to eat.
Lorre realized Crick was right. She wasn't just warm, she was sweating. Sliding back, she purred,
Food sounds wonderful.
I have to warn you, there's not much to eat around here. And what we have is,
one bushy eyebrow arched.
Well, it's an acquired taste.
I'm sure it's fine. I'm not picky.
Crick led her to a nearby table where Jared was already seated. In the center, a ladle rested in a bowl of dark liquid that surrounded 3 purplish steaming fruits. As Lorre sat down, she asked,
Is that fruit from the really big tree nearby?
Can't get 'em anywhere else. All the nutrients you need. And tasty, too.
Jared smiled and nudged Crick with a pointy elbow.
Even the boy likes 'em.
Crick grimaced.
No choice. It's the only thing edible that grows here. But, yes.
He grabbed the ladle and began serving one bulbous fruit onto each plate.
I guess I tolerate them now. Good thing. It's what we eat for every meal.
Jared grabbed his knife and fork, cut out a chunk of his fruit, and began chewing with gusto. Juice dribbled onto his beard, but he didn't seem to notice. When he saw Lorre watching, he waved his fork toward her.
Dig in. Don't worry, there's plenty more if you want.
Shaking his head, Crick joined in, albeit with less enthusiasm. Lorre carved out a small bit with her knife and fork, then tentatively placed it in her mouth. It was terrible. The bite tasted like the swamp smelled. Maybe there was a slight tangy undertone hiding somewhere, but it was overpowered by a strong, bitter, almost rancid slurry that attacked her mouth. And then the lingering aftertaste, a chalky sensation that left an impression of bile. And that wasn't even the worst part of the experience. Everywhere the juice touched the interior of her mouth, her palate started to tingle. She grew lightheaded. Lorre dropped the fork onto her plate.
What is this?
I told you, answered Crick. It's an acquired taste. If your first time is anything like mine was, I'll understand if you beg off.
Jared spoke around a mouthful.
Oh, nonsense. Crick took to it better than anyone. Wasn't long before he was finishing his plate every meal.
Lorre covered her mouth with her hand and tried to eject the bite onto her palm as gracefully as possible.
You're very kind to share your food, but Crick's right. It doesn't agree with me. I hope it won't upset you if I don't finish.
Jared frowned, but Crick nodded, even as he jabbed another piece of fruit with his fork.
Of course. You have to be pretty damn hungry to start eating these. Kid doesn't know how good he has it, mumbled Jared.
Lorre sat in silence, watching the two eat their meals, stunned that they could stomach the devil fruit at all. After a few moments, she turned to Jared.
So, how long have you and your son lived here?
Jared snorted. Crick almost coughed out what he was chewing.
Jared's not my father. What gave you that idea?
Lorre blinked.
You look so similar. I thought it was obvious.
Obvious?
The lad pushed back from the table and stood up from his chair.
I don't look anything like this old gnome. That's just insane.
Jared shrugged and kept eating.
You get more handsome every day, Crick. Nice to hear someone else thinks so, too. I don't have to listen to this.
Crick stalked to the wall and turned the wheel affixed there, unfolding the staircase contraption to the water below.
I'm gonna collect some firewood.
Without looking at either of them, Crick stomped down the stairs.
What did I say?
Asked Lorre.
Don't worry about Crick.
Jared took another bite.
You never know what'll set him off, but he'll cool down. And we do need firewood.
So, you're not related? I never would have guessed.
No, he's a guest just like you. He's been here a lot longer than most, granted.
Lorre leaned forward, resting her chin on her knuckles.
I'm not the first?
Not even close.
Jared chuckled, got up from the table, and slipped an old leather-bound tome from a nearby shelf. People have been drawn to this swamp, well, the tree mostly, for thousands of years. The person living in this house has a duty to take care of them.
Lorre's eyebrows rose. Thousands of years?
This is the journal of the first steward of this house.
Jared flipped the book open and pressed his wrinkled finger against a drawing of a lush field under a streak in the sky.
He used to have an orchard here. One day, something flew through the sky that shook the ground when it landed. After that, the water that irrigated his trees turned brackish. The land became swampy. Most everything withered, except for one tree.
The tree?
The very one. It was special. It not only flourished, but it sent out a call. Over the centuries, many people came to find it.
Like they were following a longing?
Not exactly. The longing pulls people to a god's gift. The tree isn't that. It acts more like the magic tokens that temples hand out to blunt the compulsive drive to get to their gifts. This area is a refuge on the way to something else.
So they moved on? All of them? Where'd they go?
Jared shrugged. I don't know. No one comes back to tell me. But I suspect they're all different places now.
How?
Lorre frowned.
If the longing brought them here on the way to somewhere else, wouldn't they be compelled to go there once they leave?
You mean there?
Jared pointed out the window. Lorre felt inside herself for the longing. The old man was pointing exactly where it was telling her to go, where she had been headed just hours before. That's right. Do you feel it too?
Of course. That's how I found myself here too. I'm not the original steward, you know. I've only been fulfilling his duties for a couple 100 years.
A couple of 100?
Lorre shook her head.
That's impossible, isn't it? Maybe he's just lost track of how old he really is. Putting that thought aside for now, she continued. So if the tree acts like a token, did the other visitors just take pieces of it? Could they go anywhere while holding them? Could this magic tree let me return to my family?
Smart, but it's not that simple. A branch alone wouldn't help you.
Jared winked and leaned forward.
You see, my duties aren't limited to giving you blankets and tea. At some point while you're here, I'll dream about you, and that dream will tell me what you need from the tree.
Really? Like what?
It's different for every visitor. I start with the wood the tree gives me from its heart, and end up with something bespoke. Sometimes I carve little animal figurines. For others, I make jewelry. I remember fashioning a bracelet filled with colorful sawdust, which I especially liked.
Jared shrugged.
I never know what's needed until I dream it.
And when will that happen? Asked Lorre.
Jared finished his last bite and, with a smile, set his fork down on the plate. Time for my nap, so we'll see.
We'll let these dry out a bit before using them.
Crick emptied a sack full of firewood into a bin next to the fireplace.
Is the old codger taking his nap?
Lorre sipped her tea and nodded. He explained what goes on here and then disappeared to dream about what I need, I guess.
Crick scoffed.
His dreams can take weeks or even longer to manifest.
Oh, really?
Lorre shook her head, disappointed.
How long have you been waiting?
The lad scratched his chin.
I'm not sure. Months at least. But all I can do is wait. The only alternative is to leave the swamp to follow the longing, which isn't an option.
Just thinking about the longing brought back Lorre's anxiety. But she tried to hide her discomfort behind a sip of tea and a smile. Most people are overjoyed to find out they have the longing. A god is calling you to become a priest.
I'd likely die before I ever got to a temple. I waited a long time before leaving. The longing is about as strong as it gets with me.
Crick drew up his pant leg and showed off a long scar.
I was in bad shape when I arrived. This broken leg wasn't even the worst of it. If not for this refuge, I wouldn't have survived.
He rolled the pant leg down again.
I have good reason not to trust the longing. It could pull me into a snake's nest, or way worse. With a token, I'll have choices.
Lorre nodded, remembering the mudslide that almost killed her. I understand. I'm curious about what lies at the end of this journey, but forcing me there doesn't sit right at all. Dead priests can't serve a god. Jared emerged from his bedroom, stretching and yawning and slightly limping.
Ah, Crick, you're back with the firewood. Wonderful. I have great news.
When Jared smiled at Lorre, Crick's face went white.
No.
Yes, I dreamt about Lorre. I know what she needs.
So soon? She just got here.
You know it's different for everyone. Lorre's dream was quite powerful, as if it had been waiting for the chance to make itself known. I'm excited to get working. So now, you know what happens next.
I know.
Crick scowled. She needs her heartwood. Jared rubbed his knee.
Right. Normally, I'd perform the ceremony, but my knee is acting up. I'd like you to take Lorre to the tree and accept the wood. You've seen how it's done enough times.
But I just got back in.
This is important. Once I have the dream, we need the wood immediately. I'm not as young as I used to be. While you're here, you need to help out.
Fine.
Crick wrestled on the jacket he'd just removed.
Get your cloak, Lorre. We're going.
Lorre did as instructed. As soon as her cloak was around her shoulders, the stairway was down and so was Crick.
Wait, I'm coming.
She finally caught up to the lad, sloshing his way to the tree.
I'm sorry to put you out. It's not you. It's Jared. He treats me like I'm some kind of servant. I'm a guest here, too. I'm sure he appreciates how you help out. My daughter, Myra, is a dream. She helps me without even asking. But my son, Galen...
Crick stopped, a look of cold anger in his eyes.
I told you, I'm not his son. I'm a prisoner, held against my will in this hellish swamp, choking down those damned fruits every day. You know, I loved my old life. My family is rich. I had tons of friends. There's nothing I wouldn't do to get my token and leave this place and that old man behind forever.
Without waiting for a response, he stalked off toward the tree. Stunned, Lorre paused a moment and then trailed after him. Soon, the pair approached the twisted yet majestic tree. Crick stopped about 3 feet from the trunk, well out of range of the spiky thorns.
Crick, I'm sorry about...
began Lorre.
I'm fine. Let's just get this over with.
The boy rummaged around inside his jacket and produced a small parchment.
He wrote it down for me, like you already expected me to do this.
In the swamp's spotty light, Crick squinted at the words scrawled on the page and read them aloud.
The dream has come and shown the need. For this your heart is welcome indeed. Now just a figment, but soon much more. Deliver this fate into the hands of Lorre. The hands of Lorre? Me? Is the ritual always so personal?
Crick smiled and looked up from the parchment.
No, Lore, as in written history. These were always the words, way before you showed up. I think it's a reference to the steward's journals. They record everything that happens here.
As he spoke, the tree's trunk began to tremble. The tree's thick, ropey cords squirmed and pulsed. And then, 2 cords gently pulled away from each other, revealing a glowing vertical slit between them. Crick gestured to the opening.
Go ahead. It's offering the heartwood. You need to be the one to take it.
Tentatively, Lorre wriggled between the spikes until she reached the glowing slit. With a creased brow, she glanced back.
Reach in. It's safe,
assured Crick. Lorre nodded and placed her hand through the slit. She quickly touched a knob of wood, and as soon as it made contact, the knob came free into her hand. With a smile, she brought it forth and showed Crick a bumpy, roundish object with what looked like a broken stem on one end. But the boy wasn't smiling. Instead, he looked confused.
Why isn't the tree closing?
Still holding the knob, she looked back and confirmed the glow remained. On a whim, she slipped her other hand in, and again, a wooden lump dropped into her palm. Beaming, she brought forth the new nodule.
Look, Crick, maybe there's one for you too.
The corners of Crick's perpetual scowl slowly rose into a grin, and Lorre saw an inkling of joy in his eyes for the first time. Pointing at the trunk, he said,
Keep going. The tree is still open.
Lorre grabbed both knobs in one hand, slipped the other back into the tree, and came out with yet another roundish nodule. As soon as her hand was clear, the cords trembled into motion and closed, sealing the trunk as if there had never been an opening.
3?
Crick shook his head in disbelief.
Lorre stared at the 3 pieces of wood in her cupped hands.
That's unusual?
Unheard of. It only ever offers 1.
His voice trembled and his breath came quick.
Maybe you're right.
Almost laughing, he met Lorre's gaze.
Maybe I can get a token too.
Let's find out,
said Lorre, smiling. Together they rushed back to the house, trying to avoid a storm just starting to gather above. When they reached the top of the stairs, they found Jared sitting at the table, a number of tools laid out on a mat in front of him. He already had a carving knife in hand.
Did you get it?
Lorre dumped her collection of wooden knobs on the table.
It gave me 3. What does that mean?
Crick nodded.
It's never done that before. 2 extra.
Nervously, the boy added,
Does that mean I can get 1 too?
Jared grunted, rolled his eyes, and swept the 3 knobs onto the mat.
Give me some space and let me work.
Crick pulled Lorre back.
He's right. Better be away from him when he's at work. He kind of goes into a trance and the knife just flies. We should watch from a distance.
Lorre was glad for the warning. Indeed, Jared's knife moved so quickly it was hard to follow. But despite the speed, every cut was considered, measured, confident, and perfect. He worked on all 3 pieces in concert, shavings covering the mat and flying onto the table. Within minutes, Lorre noticed each knob losing its curves. Jared was progressively uncovering a shape within, something flatter and straighter, the same within each knob. Soon, they all had corners.
Cubes?
Asked Lorre.
Is he carving them into cubes?
She couldn't help but be disappointed. Cubes weren't jewelry. They weren't even figurines. In fact, they were the least imaginative shapes she could think of. Crick rubbed his chin, his familiar scowl returning.
I don't know, but they look like they're parts of a set.
Lorre decided to wait and see what the final plan was for these 3 cubes, so was quite disappointed when Jared placed his knife on the table and declared,
Finished.
But they're just cubes.
Are they?
Asked Jared, a twinkle in his narrowed eye.
Look closer.
Lorre walked to the table and picked one up. At first, all she saw were the 6 flat sides of wood on each, but then she noticed engravings on them, images that she hadn't seen Jared carve.
Pictures?
That's right,
said Jared.
Go ahead, turn it in your hand.
She did. Each side contained a simple picture. The first was a boat. As she turned the cube, she saw more. A flute, a spider, a knife, a cloud, a stone. When she rotated again, she expected to see the boat, but instead a candle appeared.
Wait, that's more pictures than there are sides.
Right again.
Jared's eyes grew serious.
Lorre, these are the most powerful items I've ever made.
I feel it too,
said Crick, eyes wide. Lorre blinked.
What do you mean, Jared? Don't they just blunt the longing?
That's not all they do. The objects I fashion have other abilities, some quite fantastic. Usually my dreams spell them out, but this time it couldn't tell me exactly what to expect. Anything. Everything. You have to be careful. I think they might be quite dangerous.
Why are there 3 of them? Does she need all 3?
Crick's hand inched forward.
Can I have one?
As quick as a viper, Jared struck the back of Crick's hand.
Hands off. I made these for Lorre. She will need them all.
Crick snapped his hand back to his chest and scowled.
But what about me? When is it my turn? I've been waiting months for my dream, my token. When am I going to get it?
Jared's expression softened. He stood up from the table and looked fondly at the boy, who was still clutching his hand to his breast.
Crick, you haven't been here for months. You've been here for years. I thought you would have realized what's going on before now.
Crick staggered back a step.
What is going on?
I'm old. I won't be around forever. Someone needs to be the steward when I'm gone. It has to be you.
What? No. I'm still waiting for you to dream about me, right?
When Jared's gaze dropped to his feet, Crick's expression went dark. He snarled.
You already had my dream, didn't you?
Yes, days after you arrived. But you were in such bad health you couldn't make it to the tree, and I wasn't strong enough to carry you there. You needed time to recover. I waited too long. When you were better, it was too late to gather the heartwood.
Days.
Crick's brow furrowed and his hands balled into fists.
After that, though, you flourished here. You took to the fruit better than anyone, kept it down after only a couple of tries. And because of that, you became attuned to the swamp, to the tree. You told me that you're starting to have strange dreams already. Even Lorre noticed how we've come to look like each other now.
Jared put his hand on Crick's shoulder.
I'm sorry for not telling you earlier, but I'd hoped you'd come around to the thought of taking over for me on your own.
Crick glared at Jared's hand on his shoulder.
Flourished?
The boy clenched his teeth, grabbing the carving knife from the table, and stabbed Jared in the side.
You doomed me to this. Not fate. Not the tree. You did this. You stole my future.
Lorre gasped and covered her mouth. Crick lowered Jared's groaning body to the floor.
I can feel how powerful those cubes are, the boy hissed. I know I can use them to get out of here too. You want a replacement, old man? You'd better hope Lorre can do it, because it won't be me.
Lorre's mind began to spin. She fought her shock at the sudden attack and forced herself into motion. With a swipe, she grabbed the cubes from the table. Crick glowered over his shoulder at Lorre as he removed the knife from Jared's side.
Give those to me.
I can't do that. The cubes are meant for me. And the only way I'll have any power over my own fate.
Lorre backed away, glancing at the wheel on the wall that would extend the staircase. The lad began to stalk her, knife in hand.
You'll never make it. I don't want to hurt you, but I will to get those cubes. Just hand them over.
He's right,
thought Lorre.
In the time it would take to open the stairs, he'll stab me.
Focused on Crick, she kept backing away until she bumped against the windowsill. Shocked, her gaze swung outside, a 10-foot fall into a swamp battered by the growing rainstorm. Fear of Crick's intent made the choice easy.
I'm sorry about what happened to you, but you can't steal my fate to make up for what was stolen from you.
Bracing herself, Lorre swung her legs over the sill and dropped out the window. If the ground hadn't been covered in rotting vegetation and a layer of water, the impact might have done more damage than a few bruises, soaked clothes, and the air knocked from her lungs. Even so, she still didn't have much time to recover as the stairs unfolded behind her. Without any other option, she waded into the teeth of the storm, trying to find a hiding spot. She clutched the cubes in one fist as she fought hanging vines with the other.
Lorre?
A splash announced that Crick was down the stairs and not far behind her.
Give me the cubes and I'll let you be.
The slippery ground, the calf-high water, the clumps of brush and trees that blocked her path, all conspired to keep her from moving at any speed. She bounced from obstacle to obstacle, knowing the odds of escaping from Crick were plummeting. Indeed, she pushed through a bush and emerged at the ancient tree, in the exact spot Crick brought her. And, standing in front of the tree, carving knife in hand, was the murderous teen.
How did you know I'd come here?
Asked Lorre. Crick shrugged.
Where else would you go? Besides, it didn't really matter. I'd find you anywhere. I've spent years in this swamp, remember? I know it better than anyone. There's no getting away from me.
I can't give you the cubes.
Lorre pushed her wet hair from her eyes.
Sure you can. Consider the alternative. You saw me use this knife on Jared, and he nursed me back to health. I owed him my life. What do I owe you?
Crick stepped forward.
Nothing.
Those words brought Jared's bleeding body to mind, and Lorre almost gagged. She realized that the boy didn't intend to let her live regardless. Caressing the hard, wooden cubes in her palm, she asked,
You want these?
Last chance.
Crick waved the knife through the air.
Before I change my mind.
Then take them.
Lorre cocked her arm back and flung the cubes into the swamp, praying they'd be impossible to find. But nothing was that simple. As soon as the cubes left her hand, they began to spin and shake violently. The rain slowed to a crawl, still falling, but now each drop inching toward the ground. Lorre noticed light sparking from the gently floating cubes, icons flashing and then fading, replaced with others. More and more and more. And then the world went insane. The muted colors of the swamp became intense blue and then fiery red. The water below exploded into yellow fireflies that flew in concert, swarming into the shapes of people's faces she didn't recognize, and then spiraled into green rings. Roots cracked through the now dry ground, releasing columns of fire from beneath. She tried to run from them, but a windstorm picked her off of her feet and whipped her through the maze of firespouts toward something beyond. And then she saw her destination, the ancient tree just ahead. But the fire had taken hold of it too, its trunk and branches ablaze. Like a leaf buffeted by the air, the wind wound her through those branches, near to glowing crystal fruit with strange scenes inside. A combat ring made of sand, a balcony high up in a tower, and a strange hallway whose angles were all wrong. Each, she sensed, was dying to tell its own story.
What is happening? Are these glimpses of possibilities?
She tried to catch her breath, but had a hard time.
What do they mean?
The tree's heart cracked open and sucked her toward the intense firestorm inside, the source of all this destruction. Just before she hit, Lorre shielded her face. But she didn't burn. No, she was wet, and cold, and alive. Standing in front of the tree as if she hadn't moved, Lorre opened her eyes to find the swamp unchanged. Rain pelted her and the confused boy shakily held onto his knife.
What just happened?
Asked Crick. Lorre shivered, both from the cold and shock.
I don't know.
It doesn't matter.
Crick recovered quickly. He dove into the water with purpose.
I can sense those cubes. I know where they are.
Oh no,
thought Lorre.
Throwing them away didn't help at all.
Before Lorre had taken a step, Crick grabbed and held up one of the cubes.
I have it.
He stared at it with triumph in his eyes.
Huh, is that a picture of a lightning bolt?
No sooner did Crick utter the word than the rainstorm escalated its fury. Lightning struck a tree only 20 feet from where they stood. Mud and wood splinters flew in every direction. The shock traveled through the water that surrounded Lorre's calves and dropped her to her knees, her hands covering her ears against the thunderous boom. Crick took his cube and tried to scramble away from the strike, but after only a few steps, another lightning bolt pounded the ground in his intended direction, followed by another. The latter threw the boy from his feet right back into the clearing he'd just left.
It's after me. It wants to kill me,
whimpered Crick, swinging his gaze to Lorre.
You did this somehow.
The boy scrambled to his feet and stood over her, brandishing his knife, the ancient tree at his back.
You're coming with me. If this lightning is going to kill me, it'll have to kill both of us.
With a grunt, he gestured her up with his knife.
On your feet.
One more bolt, the largest and most powerful yet, struck the ancient tree and tore through its heart. The thousands-year-old trunk exploded into shards. Jagged pieces flew in every direction, but worse were the thorns, deadly foot-long spiked projectiles. Hundreds attacked the swamp like swiftly fired arrows, whizzing everywhere around her. Lorre ran her hands over her arms and torso and found herself unhurt, but then she looked up to see Crick looming over her, his arms dropped to his sides. As she watched, the boy toppled forward onto her, revealing a back riddled with the devastating thorns. With a strength born of desperation, Lorre wriggled out from under Crick's dead weight. The swamp was different. The tree was dead. The blackened husk left by the lightning no longer blunted the longing. But something else did. The cube that the boy still held somehow, the token that Jared promised would protect her. She could sense it just as Crick did. Even with the cube hidden from her eyes, Lorre nonetheless reached under the water and pried it from Crick's grasp. Seeing the carved wood brought to mind its maker.
Jared,
whispered Lorre. Praying she wasn't too late to help him, she raced back to the house, pulled herself up the stairs, and knelt beside Jared's body. A puddle of blood had pooled under him. Far too much blood. His eyes were closed, but the old man still took one shallow breath after another. Lorre put her hand on his cheek.
Jared?
His narrow eyes fluttered open, and a weak smile crawled across his beard-shrouded lips.
Lorre, you're all right. And Crick?
He's dead. I'm sorry.
A tear beaded at the corner of the old man's eye.
I see. Do you still have the dice?
Dice, realized Lorre. Not cubes. Dice.
Yes, I mean I have one, and I know where the others are.
Go get the remaining 2. You'll need them.
He grasped weakly at her hand.
But first, can I ask something of you?
Jared, I can't take over as the steward for you.
Her insides twisted into knots at the thought of what just occurred.
The tree is dead. I think I killed it.
Jared's forehead creased, but he nodded slightly.
I felt its death the moment it happened. But it's not your fault, Lorre. Everything led to this. The tree fulfilled its purpose, of that I'm sure, and the steward's job is done now. That's not what I was going to ask.
Jared coughed. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth.
With those dice, you can go anywhere, even back to your family. But I hope you'll go on. Follow the longing. Find out who has been calling us. All these years, it's haunted me. I've given up so much for this god, and I've never even known its name.
The old man finally opened his eyes wide, revealing stunning topaz blue orbs that lacked any white.
You have the dice, a more powerful talisman I've never seen. If anyone can safely track this longing to its end, it's you.
Sighing one last time, Jared closed his eyes. His head lolled to the side and his hand released hers.
Poor man,
she thought.
Everything he built here, thousands of years of legacy gone in an instant. And I did that.
With one hand, she held her die and squeezed. With the other hand, she stroked his hair.
I won't do that again if I have the choice.
After a moment, Lorre walked down the stairs, returned to the tree, and began searching for the remaining dice. But she didn't have to search. She knew. In her mind, the dice gleamed like golden fireflies, despite being covered by the water and muck. When the second die emerged, she identified the icon on top as a pincushion. Immediately, she swung her gaze over to Crick's back, with its forest of thorns sticking out.
Crick became the pincushion, and this dice roll made it happen somehow.
Even though Lorre already knew this, she repeated it aloud.
These dice are dangerous.
After another grab, she brought the final die above the water surface and stared at its icon. The die's face showed an arch, under which stood the silhouette of a soldier of war holding a spear. Immediately, she wheeled around, scanning for anyone else in the swamp. But there was no sound but the rain, and she was quite alone.
Fight you may.
A voice in her head startled her.
But deep down you know, it's time to leave. You have to go.
Just when she'd almost forgotten about it, the rhyming voice returned. Her first reaction was to tell the voice to kick rocks. She had the dice now, so she could leave. Go anywhere she wanted, even return to her family. She dropped her gaze back to the final die.
What does it mean?
She wondered. While Jared's final wish weighed on her, the truth was that her curiosity was already hooked. She had control over her destiny now. She could choose what to do, and she could always return home after solving this mystery. Wrapping her travel cloak close around her, she allowed the longing to direct her path, but traveled it at her own leisurely pace.
I don't know who you are, little soldier, but I'm guessing I'll find out.
Don't stop now. Continue Lorre's journey in The Child of Chaos, The Chronicles of Chaos, Book 1. Author's Note. After penning the finale to the series, it was nice to have the opportunity to return to this world and write a short story that answered a burning question in fans' minds. Where did Lorre get those dice? And because I wrote it now, I was able to give literal glimpses into what will unfold for new readers who are just entering my world. To those readers, I'm excited for you, embarking on this epic journey that took me 25 years to complete. You have no idea what's coming, the fantastic twists and turns on the road ahead, the true friends and terrible foes you'll encounter. But I advise you to buckle up, because the ride doesn't slow even a bit the entire time. For those interested, the Dice of Chaos falls chronologically between the Game of War, Book 0, and the Child of Chaos, Book 1, hence the designation on this cover of 1/2. That said, make sure you read both Books 0 and 1 before heading into the House of Prophecy, Book 2. You'll thank me later. Also, make sure to check in with me at www.mysterium.blog and join my community. I'd love to be a companion on your journey through this world. Your friend, Glenn Dahlgren. Dedication. Dedicated to my constant companion during most of my author journey, even if she did sometimes lay her chin on my arm so I couldn't type. To Goldie, the best cat ever, named for her golden eyes, who held out until the story was finished to pass on. She was my dear friend. I already miss her terribly.